Thank you for joining the December 5th, 2019 VOLTHA call. Just a reminder to everyone that our meetings are public and recorded. We do post them to our YouTube channel after the meeting, so please be mindful of that during discussions and during any presentations that are shared on today's meeting. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Our main item today is going to be the discussion that we scheduled for today as a follow-up from Tuesday's meeting. And Zach's going to be leading that discussion. And in the chat, if everyone could note that he has provided a link to the document that he's working on. That way you can have that accessible for you afterwards as well. So then also we had a tentative slot. We didn't know if it'd be this week or next week for a demo. It's going to be next week. So next week on Thursday, we'll have a demo for the exporter of redfish parameters. Those are our main items that we were targeting for today. So are there any other discussion topics that the group would like to include on today's meeting? Okay, and I did not see anything new flagged with all discussed in JIRA either. So I think we'll go ahead and get started, Zach, with the discussion. Do you want me to give you presentation rights to walk through your document, or do you want me to share it on my screen?
You can keep sharing it. I think this is going to probably not be a very long discussion, but let's go.
All right.
So what's been brought up is basically how are we dealing with the versioning of our dependencies for SEBA and VOLTHA. And one of the things that I realized I didn't know after I started thinking about this was I'm not sure we know what the expectation of support is for a release of SEBA and VOLTHA, how many months, years we intend to support it. And then if during that lifetime, some of the tools go end of life, what we need to do to either bring individual VOLTHA and SEBA components up to using that newer tool chain or dependency, and how we want to do that. And I also, just tactically, I made a few lists of proposed versions for the next two releases, which is the 2.2 release this month and the 2.3 release early next year. The only change that I'm proposing currently for the 2.2 release is to update the version of Go. That's from 1.2 to 1.3. The rest is just basically description of what we're currently using. For the 2.3 release, I think a new version of Go isn't going to be out. 1.14 might be out by then. If we look further down, I have some descriptions of the release cycles, these different pieces of software. But 1.14 is going to be pretty new at the planned release date of VOLTHA 2.3. Some of the other components, like Kubernetes and Helm and ONOS, I think we're in the process of dealing with compatibility issues with those and getting those working in the larger context of the system. But I think that some of those updates are probably not quite ready to go in. So I could use some input there on the first, whether what the expected support lifecycle is from the service providers. So if you're a service provider, I'd like to know sort of what the update cycle we intend to have, or you intend to have, for the software when it gets deployed. I'm not sure I see many people on who fall into that category.
Likewise, so we'll probably have to take that separately to folks and bring feedback to you after the call.
Okay. So I also wanted to go over really quickly what the support lifecycle is for various components we're using. So to start, Kubernetes doesn't do any long-term support releases. If you ask the Kubernetes community, how do I get long-term support for my product? They will tell you, go talk to Red Hat and buy OpenShift. That's the most frequent response I hear. There are some I believe Kubernetes is being included in some OS releases. Like OpenStack was before. I'm not fully aware of that, the situation there. So I would, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to get deployed. And there are some issues we've had with going to newer versions of Kubernetes. Specifically, if you go to 1.16, the API versioning that we use in some of the Helm charts breaks. So that's something we should probably address sometime before release. For now, and for most of our testing, staying on 1.15 or earlier, that's been working. Another component we're using is Helm. Helm 3 is out. It's pretty new. People are trying it out. I'm not sure if anyone has actually tried running a SEBA VOLTHA pod under Helm 3. We should probably decide whether we're going to switch to that because it does change some workflow. It eliminates the tiller pod and does some other things, but I'm not fully aware of that because I'm not sure it's been tried in the community. And Docker is dedicated or is sort of dictated by the Kubernetes version, tells you which version of Docker to use. So those are the runtime components. When it comes to the tooling components, there's these are basically compilers and interpreters that we're using to build or build the actual code base. So for Go, there's that 2297, which is the upgrade to 1.13 story that I have. Go has a release policy, and if you take a look at that link, basically they support the current release and one previous release. The main issues that have come up in previous releases have been security problems, or at least the ones that I could think would need an update and a recompile of the code, are basically security problems with encryption and sometimes also some functionality problems or bugs. Go gets a release one every 6 to 7 months, and they support the current release and one previous version. So currently 1.13 is supported and 1.12 is supported. When 1.14 comes out, probably sometime next February, then 1.12, which is our current version, will not be supported. And they're not doing long-term support releases. So the question is, if that seems pretty short to me, and I'm thinking that people are going to be deploying the VOLTHA components that use Go and the other SEBA components that use Go, probably on a longer time frame than that 12-month support cycle. So one of the questions I had is, if there's a Go update, do we want to, in a stable release cycle, to be updating the Go version we're using? And in my opinion, I think we're probably going to need to do this just because of the support cycle lengths. The Go sometimes does change the things like Go format, and sometimes some language constructs will change. Go has tooling that will do automatic updates of this. So I think we probably need to be ready for doing those sorts of changes on a maintenance, from a maintenance standpoint. This also might mean that we need to have multiple versions of Go installed on our testing and QA setups. This is not difficult because the way that Go installs is versioned on disk, similar to how Java is installed, at least in QA. You can get to Java 8 and 11 on the current QA system. So we'd probably have Go 12 and 13 installed both on the current QA system. So are there any thoughts on that?
I'm curious what
do
Kubernetes and etcd, other bigger Go-based projects, what they do, and maybe we just copy that. Is it like a once a year or once every 6 months we just move to whatever the current Golang version is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. It sounds like we should do the move to 1.13 sooner rather than later due to the potential expiration of 1.12 in February. Should we schedule this work? What priority like high priority and get it done soon, or get it done near the end of the month, or get it done early next year? Or when do we do this in
I
case
don't
it
think.
is somewhat disruptive?
Yeah, I don't think it would be. My feeling is that it probably would not be disruptive or very disruptive at all. So I would prefer to do it soon, like maybe end of this week, beginning of next week, so the next day or two. How do people feel like that would be? Is that too aggressive? And or do we have too many other things in flight right now to do that sort of an update?
I think I'm fine with it.
This week and next week it may be a little bit aggressive, but I would say like it's something that needs to be done. The sooner the better.
Okay.
I think there's other higher priority things to deal with. The other aspect too is when we're talking about VOLTHA, like we have a lot of components that they can migrate independently. We don't need everything to be 1.12, 1.13 right away. Maybe some can go, if they're ready, they can go right away, and then some maybe a little bit later.
Okay, and I can, at least from a CI perspective, I can install multiple versions of Go, 1.12 and 1.13, and test against one of them switchable in the CI system. So that adds a little bit of complexity, but it's not that difficult.
So what happens with the go.mod files? They declare a version. What happens if we, for example, move Volta Protos to 1.13, but then leave Volta Go at 1.12? Will Volta Go refuse to do this because there's two different versions called out in the dependencies?
So in general, Go is completely backwards compatible, and it guarantees that between versions. So updating Go should be really, really smooth. The question has more to do with the tools surrounding it. But actually updating, like with your Protos example, there shouldn't be any issues. A Go 1.13 should be able to compile Go 1.12 code just fine.
Okay, good.
So as long as the Go mod file isn't touched by 1.13, it won't get out of order and the CI system won't complain. Is that the understanding?
That's
So you're talking about
that seems to be the case. Because
yeah,
when we're using the Protos, we're not actually changing the Protos repo. We're just pulling it in and using it as a dependency. So it shouldn't matter what version it claims to use.
Okay, that seems fine. I'll take on the CI side of this and get both versions installed. I think that makes the most sense from a transition standpoint. And then I think we should for the protos at least, probably do them first and then work down the dependency tree. Does that sound reasonable?
So Volta Protos, then Volta libgo, then everything else.
Correct.
sounds fine to me.
Makes sense.
Okay, I'll update the 2297 ticket with that, and we'll proceed there.
So
Is
Zach,
that would there, the way we're doing Go mod in 1.13, is there going to be changes there? Like I know that there's certain exponent that we're using. Are we still going to use the vendor directory in 1.13?
Yes, that I don't think that part changes. The only issue, so the issue we've been having is that Go 1.12 and Go 1.13 can reorder things in files. Like they have different rules for how things are ordered. So we wanted to do a verification of the vendor folder. And that was running into issues because some people were on 1.12 and the CI system was on 1.12. And some people were pushing 1.13 created vendor folders. But in terms of using it or pulling it into another repo, it's not an issue because you're not trying to change it. You're not trying to verify it.
Okay, so we can have a 1.12 repo using a 1.13 vendor dir.
Yes, that
Okay.
should work.
I'm just writing up what I said. So both 1.12 and 1.13 in the CI, update Volta protos, use 1.13, then Volta lib go, then others. And that others last part would be also the Docker files. They would need to change their from lines to go to a 1.13 version of Go. So I would probably want to lean on the core developers and the adapter developers to make those changes once the protos and libgo have been updated. But as Kent said, I don't think this is going to be extremely disruptive. Okay, so that's the discussion on the Go side of things. Python-wise, we know that 2.7 is end of life. We're tracking the work to move to Python 3 here in 1776. I have a patch outstanding that pulls out the OLT or the OF agent into its own repo. That currently does not upgrade it to Python 3, but because it's a separate repo, then we can go through the process of making that happen. That's somewhat difficult because it does not currently have any tests for the Python OF agent. So while I can do that update, I'm going to need to test it more heavily. In terms of end of life, we're in a lot better situation than with Go because Python keeps a support length for most of their branches for 5 years. And right now, if we look at 3.6, I think it's good until 2023. So we have a lot more leeway in terms of sticking with one version for the life of the Volta or SEBA release. And so the general plan is to move away from 2.7 as soon as we can, and update the CI environment. We're intending to go to Ubuntu 18.04 sometime soon. This is for both that we are also going to start using some tooling that requires 3.6, Python 3.6, and installing a alternate Python in Ubuntu as the base Python is somewhat difficult. And currently, if we look at the Volta Python base, it's using 3.6. So all of our code currently uses this. So any comments on the Python side of things? Okay, moving on. Java, we're currently using ONUS 1.13, which is built with JDK8. There's a lot of work being done to move to ONUS 2.2. All the apps have been moved, I believe. But I don't think we have decided when we're going to make that jump from 1.13 to 2.2. We have, people have spun this up inside of ONF, and it has been working, but I think the process, or I'm not sure what the steps are we need to do to make VOLTHA use the ONUS 2.2 release. What I think this might entail taking, isn't there a VOLTHA ONUS container that ships a bunch of apps already, and we would need to update that?
Yeah, most of the development testing, compose testing, uses the VOLTHA ONUS repository to build like you said, an image that already has the apps built in that are supported, and all it does is it pulls from a base image that is the ONUS 1.13.9, I think. So it could be moved, it could be tagged in its own way. VOLTHA ONUS could be tagged, 3.x or 2.4 or whatever we need to kind of separate it a little bit so we can test and work on some things without affecting everyone.
Okay, I'm going to make a new JIRA for this. And then I'll pass that on to the people who are working on the ONUS apps, and they can do that update. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it sounds fine with me. The setup for that particular repo is similar to how that container was built in VOLTHA 1.x. It uses some Maven repository commands to pull out the released OR files and then injects them into the build. So it has a bit of flexibility there. You can also have your own locally built ORs included into your local build of VOLTHA ONUS. So if you want to test something without having to do a Maven release, there's a way to do that. Okay.
There's also talk of clustered ONUS, and ONUS upstream has Helm charts for this. I think maybe the two-step process is get ONUS 2.2 and the new apps working, and then get the ONUS clustering working as a second step, which is probably outside, is probably not something we want to do in the near term. That might be something that happens beginning of next year, I'm thinking, with the amount of time we have. I'll run that past Sarov for the okay, and the last item we had was the protobuf toolchain. Currently, we're using version 3.7. The newer toolchains affect code generation, which is used in VOLTHA Protos. And it means that when we do that jump, all the developer machines in the CI system would need to be updated. I think I can version this. I'm not sure how easy it is to have multiple Proto-C versions installed. So because sometimes the code generation is for compatibility with newer versions of other languages. So for example, I think sometime after 3.7, Proto-C got updated to work with a newer Python version. I could easily see there being changes to the code generation to make it more compatible with, say, Go or Java code. Because of the way that Proto-C works, I don't think it would be a problem to update this mid-release. but I think we should probably deal with that when the time comes. There aren't really the same sort of security or bug fix concerns with this as there would be with, say, a Go upgrade. But I think it would be nice to rev the Proto-C version before we do a release, because currently 3.7 I think was released last February. And if we have people who are going to come along and use, want to use, say, a slightly newer version of Python or maybe newer versions of Go, it would be good to have a newer version that might be more compatible. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as long as we stick with the release version and it's advertised out in some documentation or another, we should be fine. But yeah, okay. Otherwise you'll get diffs in the Jenkins verification and lots of questions.
Yeah. Okay. That really wraps it up. Are there other versioning issues that people wanted to address about either upgrading component versions? I didn't really jump into the idea of updating libraries. We probably should go through and do a scrub of which versions of libraries we're using, but some tooling exists to help with that. For the individual libraries we are depending on, either in mod or in Python in the requirements file. So I think that can be dealt with on a repo by repo basis and a dependency by dependency basis. But that's pretty much what I have. If there are any other questions, we can keep this document up to date and probably keep the lists of which versions we're supporting in each release up to date. I can transfer this also to the VOLTHA documentation site so that people know what to expect when they're building the software. And I would still like to get information from service providers about their expectations for a support lifetime for the VOLTHA software, and when they expect to do updates. Making the updates as simple as possible for point releases is, I think, probably a priority that we're not going to know we have until we need it. So it would be good to think ahead about that. That's all I have, Julie.
All right, thank you, Zach. Any other questions or comments for Zach? All right, let me go back to our agenda. So that was our discussion topic for today. Again, we will have a demo next Thursday for the exporter for the redfish parameters. And then Tuesday we'll have our usual meeting and go over new issues and any other topics for discussion that are identified prior to Tuesday's meeting. I think that covers what we needed to do today, so we can go ahead and adjourn early. Last call for questions or comments before we close today's meeting. Okay, thanks everyone. Zach, thanks for walking us through that information. I'll provide the link to the document in the minutes as well when I send that out. And we will go ahead and close today's meeting. I'll stop the recording.